We wanted to bring, at a certain time, the exhibitions around to art, how journalists deal with human tragedy. And so we've invited these two artists tonight, Brian Plonka, who will be speaking upstairs within his exhibit, who's a photographer for the Spokesman Review, and Teresa Tamura, who's in the photojournalism department, and she's going to talk about another project which deals with dealing with human tragedy. And so I think the format tonight, what we'll do is start with Teresa's slides, and then we'll take a break and go upstairs, and Brian's going to walk around within his exhibition, and then we'll come back down for any questions that anybody might have. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Teresa, and she's going to speak briefly about what she's working on and show slides.
All right. Hello, thank you for coming out tonight. I've been a photojournalist in newspapers primarily for, more than 20 years, and I started this project actually in 1994. I started photographing remnants of the Minidoka internment camp. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with internment camps. Let me just see a raise of hands to make sure that, okay, I won't go into the history of it. But I didn't learn about the camps until I was in college. And after I found out, it was through one of my college professors, and he suggested that I start researching it, maybe doing something with it, because my degree was in journalism. And I wasn't really interested in pursuing it at the time, and I left the state and moved across the country to different jobs. And it wasn't until I moved back to Idaho and President Clinton declared it a national monument that I decided that it was time to start investigating and working on it in earnest. And so the pictures that I'm showing you are kind of the progression in my process of one, the awareness of finding out what you want to photograph, and then 2, the research part, and then 3, getting started, how you go about exploring a topic, and then the context and connections and how that leads from one thing to another. The film that I use for this project is in part infrared, which is for the outdoor location scenes, and it gives it a very kind of ghosty look to it. And then portraits were medium format, which is a square, larger negative. And then some of the interior objects were taken with TechPan, which is a very fine-grained black and white film. So all this is shot on black and white film, and I printed them all myself. And I will go ahead and start the slides. Oops, and if you have any questions, you can save them for the end of the presentation after Brian. This picture was taken in the spring of 1930. It's the first grade class of the Van Buren Elementary School in Caldwell, Idaho. And I'm wondering if you can point out my dad. He's obviously the only Japanese American in the crowd. That's kind of the way Idaho was at the time. There were some Japanese families, but not very many. And what people don't know is that the Japanese Americans that were located in Idaho did not have to go into the camps because Idaho is a landlocked state and it was outside of the exclusion area. This map shows where Minidoka is. It's kind of in that lower right-hand corner of Idaho.
Laser pointer?
You know, do you have one? I would love one because I don't have one. Yeah, he's prepared. I know. Actually.
Buttons right at the top there.
All right, let's see. There we go. So there's Minidoka. That's the area where Caldwell is there. But even in Missoula, there was at Fort Missoula, they had a camp for the men that were first arrested and thought to be leaders in this area, which is the exclusion zone. Let's see. Right in here, this line is the demarcation. So anyone who lived from this side over, they had to go into the camps. Yeah, everyone on the West Coast there. And so depending on which state they lived in, they had to go into the various camps. Like the people that were sent to Minidoka primarily came from the Seattle and Portland area, also Alaska. In the research that I did, this one book called Executive Order had a number of different photographers' work. This is from Dorothea Lange, who's quite a well-known photographer. She worked for the War Relocation Authority and started documenting the evacuations as they were going on. And this person who owned the store was a graduate of the University of California, and the day after Pearl Harbor was bombed, he put up this sign on a storefront. A little bit louder. This is Ansel Adams. He took this picture in Manzanar, and actually Manzanar is probably one of the most photographed of the relocation camps. This is an interior view of a barrack, and he actually was working and produced a book called Born Free and Equal. When it was published in 1944, there were a lot of book burnings, and it's very hard to find an original copy. It has since been reproduced and has been reissued by a different book publisher. Another photojournalist who documented the times was Ouija. This was taken in New York and was published in his book called Ouija's New York, Photographs from 1935 to 1960. This is just an anti-Japanese demonstration in New York. And this photographer is unknown, but it was taken in Parker, Arizona in 1945, a sign on a barber shop in a small town near the Colorado River Relocation Center. When I moved to Seattle in 1993, it was the first time I'd really been in an area that had a large Asian influence because of its proximity to the Pacific Rim. And there were a lot of Japanese gardens and different cultural influences there that I had never been around before. And so I started exploring Japanese gardens. And this one is called the Kubota American Japanese Garden. It's in the Rainier Valley. And this was the home of Fujitaro Kubota, who was interned in Minidoka. This house has since been torn down, and the property has been sold to the city, and it's now a city park. To show the contrast of the landscape from the people in Seattle who are used to a very lush, plush, green landscape. When they got off the train in Idaho, this is a specific spur of railroad track where they were dropped off and then bused to the actual site. It's very dry and barren. And because I've grown up in Idaho, I look out at that landscape and I see, just this vast space, and I think it's really beautiful. But if you're used to seeing a lot of green plants and lush trees, I think it would be a shock to see. This is a copy photo from a yearbook that was produced, the only camp to produce its own, and it was called the Minidoka Interlude. And they did group shots of each of the blocks, and it was a series of barracks that they had organized into by number. And the little black and white areas that I blocked out from the CP toning is an artist named Roger Shimamura and his grandmother standing behind. And so I was able to meet Roger, and he was actually the first person I photographed in Boise, Idaho. And Roger is a well-known artist who's done a series of acrylic paintings based on his grandmother's diaries that she kept when she was in camp, and that's a photograph of her on the left and then a painting of her on the right. And he teaches in Kansas. He just retired this year and spends a lot of time in Seattle, but always drives through and stops at Minidoka. This is a picture of a barrack. It's kind of leaning over. This is one of the few original barracks still in existence, and it's located on a property called the I Farm, which is the Idaho Farm and Ranch Museum. It's in Jerome. And since I took this picture, they've added a big barn right in front of it, so I would not be able to get the same shot again. And they keep, it's a collection of different farm equipment and different things. So yes, this is infrared. The ones on location like this are infrared. This was with the tech pan. This is in the interior of the barrack, which gives you a sense of the space and what was furnished in the rooms when the people arrived there. They were given a stove and then the cots. People had to make their furniture out of scrap lumber because there was none issued to them other than the beds. And so these were some children's chairs that had been given to a woman who lived in Jerome, and she donated them to the Jerome Historical Society. And then the Historical Society let the I Farm display them in this barrack. A doll remnant that was found on the campsite. Before it was declared a national monument, people would go and scavenge on the site and find different pieces of dishware and toys and objects, and they would bring them into the museum. Now it's illegal to do that since it's become a national monument. When I first started working on this, I went to the site and photographed the obvious things. There's some signage at the site that described, what was there, but it didn't have a lot of description of, where things used to be, and so it's really difficult if you don't have someone there to know what's what. The house in the background, I have another picture of further down in the carousel, but this is part of the waiting room, and this is one of the few original structures that are still standing, and it's out of basalt rock, and they're debating what to do with this, if they want to try and rebuild the structure or just leave it as it is. This is a home that was in the background of the sign picture. It was Carl Aberle's house, and he bought it from one of the original homesteaders. What they did with the land after the camp was closed is they parceled it off, and they had a lottery system, and people who were veterans were given preferential treatment, and they were allowed to put their name into the lottery, and if their name was pulled, then they were given this land. And so he had 3 barrack structures on his property, and so this house was one of the barracks, but it's been remodeled, and so it's really hard to tell that that's what it used to be. This is another one of the few original structures still there. This used to be the fire station. It's on another property belonging to John Herman, and he uses it as a storage shed. But before his house was built on the land, they lived there, he and his wife, until their house was built. this is also on the John Herman property, and it was a spud cellar, and it was built to store the root crops that were grown. When the camp was built, they cleared the sagebrush and turned it into agriculture, and primarily to grow food to feed the people that were in the camp. And so they would store the potatoes and different root crops in this cellar, and it's since fallen into disrepair. With the National Park Service taking over, they're trying to restore this and make it part of the interpretive center. This is Anna Tamura, no relation to me, but she was a landscape architect studying at the University of Washington. She worked on her master's thesis and researched what parts of the camp were still at the site, and she gave me a lot of information which was helpful for me to identify things that I wouldn't have known what it was. For example, when I first went there, I didn't know that this collection of rocks was the site of a former Japanese garden. And when I first went there, I thought, well, gosh, that's odd that they're just kind of situated there, but that was part of it. And in fact, a year later, a team of archaeologists from Arizona came up and cleared all the grass, and they dug underneath the dirt, and there's this whole array of rock pathways that led to different places. And so this is before that excavation work had been done. Another remnant that is part of the original camp is this little bit of road which leads into John Herman's property, Hunt Road. Most of the streets have been reconfigured and no longer follow the original grid that was there. Through Anna, I learned about Mr. Kleinkopf, who was the superintendent of the schools at the Minidoka camp. He lived in Twin Falls, and his son still lives there. And so his wife typed up his 600-page diary. This is before computers, and they gave it to the Twin Falls Public Library, and where it's bound, and it's still held today. And so people can read about his memories of what happened, and just all kinds of information in this book that's available for checkout there. This is Hiro Shiozaki. He was a veteran of World War II, and he now does a lot of public speaking to educate young students about the internment camps, even though he did not have to go because his family grew up in Blackfoot, Idaho, which is a little ways north of Pocatello. But 6 of his friends were killed in World War II, and that's the headstone that the VA put up. They're kind of spread out, but there were a lot of farmers. In fact, that's where my grandfather first settled and then moved to the Nampa area. So this is Mats Koto. She was originally from Oregon, had to go to the camp, and then met a man who was from Twin Falls, who was Japanese American. They ended up getting married. She settled about 45, it's not even 45 minutes, maybe a half an hour from where the internment camp had been. And she still lives there today. Her husband passed away 2 years ago, and they used to have a restaurant where their children, they had 3 kids, where they worked.
Seems like that slide projector's getting louder.
It is getting loud. This is an example of some more of the scrap furniture that was built. This is another couple's, and they just have it in their garage, but I think some museum at some point would like to have this for their collection, but right now it's just kind of a storage spot. Sometimes they would buy them or they would get them, but yeah, they would just kind of make do with what they had. This is Neil King. He's the superintendent of the National Park Service for the fossil bed monument in Hagerman, and then also the Minidoka internment camp. So he's overseeing 2 different sites. This piece of wood was shipped to me from New Jersey, and then I photographed it and then shipped it back. But it was part of the woodworker George Nakashima. I don't know if any of you are familiar with his work, but he's quite well known in the woodworking world. And he would scavenge for pieces of bitter brush, which is very twisted and interesting, and he would cut little pieces of it and use it as handles for furniture that he made after he got out of the camp. But he saved this little scrap, and his daughter thought it was a reminder, from his days there, and he never, used all of it. He wanted to keep a little piece, which was on his shelf. And this is Takashi Hori. He used to own the Panama Hotel, which is in the background. This is in the International District of Seattle. When the internment and the evacuation orders came in, people had to quickly find a place to store their belongings, and so they asked Mr. Hori if they could put their things in the basement of this hotel, which he let them do. And so even today, there are still items that have not been claimed, even though he has since sold the hotel. The new owner has realized the importance of it and has left it intact, and in fact has loaned some of the items to the Smithsonian where it's been seen. And she's also opened a little tea house, and she cut a hole in the floor and put plexiglass so that you could look down and see the items into the basement. It's really neat. So if you go to Seattle, it's right on the International District. Yeah, the Panama Hotel. Yeah, so go check it out. It's really pretty interesting. And sometimes she'll organize informal tours too for you to go see what's left. This is Dr. Kitamoto, and he is a dentist on Bainbridge Island. And Bainbridge Island was one of the first areas to be evacuated. And he was only 3 years old at the time. And right now they're trying to spearhead an effort to make the Eaglesdale Landing, which is the area where he's now standing, but it's no longer a ferry dock anymore, into a national monument site. They put a rock and a memorial there, but it's not official yet. They're working on it. But these are some historic photos that the Post-Intelligencer took the day of the evacuation. This is March 30th, 1942, as the residents from Bainbridge Island are loading the ferry. And using the little laser pointer, if I can find it here, that's him right there walking down the dock. And what I'm going to try and do more of is to use these historical photos and then to retrace and find the people. But
keep the mic away from that.
oh, okay. He's standing on the right there, Dr. Kitamoto, and that's his mother and his two sisters. This is Fumi Hayashida. This picture has been reproduced in a number of different books. She was 31 years old at the time, and her daughter Keio was just over a year, and they're being evacuated from Bainbridge Island. Here they are last summer at the Minidoka Remembered reunion, which was in Seattle. Hundreds of people from across the country gathered there, and Keio said she'll let people take their picture as long as their mom is still alive. Tom Kubota, whose house I first showed, is sitting, they named a stroll garden after him, and he's getting up in years and is not well in health, but agreed to be photographed in the garden.
Where's
The garden is if you're going towards Renton, it's before Renton, it's kind of in between it's near the Boeing airport. If you're driving south, it's on the left-hand side. But yeah, look in the phone book because they give good direction. This is a picture of the Kubota garden. It's really an incredible 20 acres of different types of garden area. And this rock actually had come from the Minidoka site. The Kogita family, his father shipped a lot of rocks that he had found in the area, and he created this elaborate rock garden, which has been photographed and published in some books, and he decorated his front yard with these giant lava rocks, and he also made a little fish pond out of them that came from Idaho. And some of the furniture that was built by his father, who was actually a carpenter, so the quality is much higher, but again, using scrap lumber, a dresser, a table using the bitter brush and trying to collage it. He didn't complete this. You can see that the edge is still missing some pieces. And another box that was built by Paul Kogita's wife, Takanaga's. it was, just to ship all their belongings after the camp was closed. And then another table, this person actually signed it and dated it 1944. Most of the furniture is not signed, but a few pieces can be. And actually that was taken in Spokane on my way back from Seattle. A nephew now has this table. And I'll close this up with a picture from the Minidoka Remembered Reunion Picnic, and the person on the left is a student, and then the teacher is on the right, and let me find his name. That is James Nishimura. He's from upstate New York. He's retired from the cable company and came out to try and make renewed ties with his friends. And Robert Coombs, who is now in Sacramento, and he taught political science at the camp school, and they're reminiscing about old times. So that is kind of a collection of some of the pictures that I've been working on. So that is it.
Everything I do is very personal. Everything I do is very much from the heart. I can't just lift up a camera and take a picture. I'm a daily photographer, and no matter what assignment I do, I try to add something to it. Anyways, fast forwarding a few years, I've done a lot of in-depth projects, alcoholism, eating disorders, things that have affected me personally. And living in the West, when I first came out here, it was like, wow, it's such a cool, clean place. Big mountains, puffy white clouds, the buffalo, all that. And then I started hearing about things in Wallace, Idaho, like the Superfund site there. And then I heard about Libby, the Seattle paper broke the story. And so we always had these little snippets of life that I just didn't really know existed. And so when I started documenting the West, it became very environmental, showing people what is in your backyard. Because I went through a couple of years not knowing anything. I just thought it was prairie dogs and blue skies, and I loved it. But there were a lot of hidden problems in the West, and Libby was one of them. And we were, we're 180 miles away from, I think 180 miles away from Libby. It's a long way. It's a long way. And so I talked to my boss, and I said, we have to do this story. And so he's like, okay, we're going to give you 3 days a week, every other week or every week, and go up to Libby. And so I started meeting people, and Gayla Benefield, I actually want to take this jacket off, I'm dying. Gayla Benefield, who is, I guess you could say, she works hard to bring the plight of asbestos with the area. Thanks. And so anyways, so I go up there, and I don't know a soul there. And it's like Missoula or any place in the West. You go in there, and everyone, no matter where you go into, they don't know you. But Gayla made it a point to take me around and introduce me to people. And I started hanging around, and it was very hard to get underneath the skin in Libby because everyone was so just weary of outsiders, weary of the press, number one. But when I explained what I wanted to do, the doors started opening up, and they started closing at the same time. People like Mike Powers, this is where he lived for 30 years. And I knew him for like 8 months before I took this picture, and I kept visiting him, and I kept taking photographs, and nothing was working out. And one day, out of the blue, he called me and says, "The guys in white suits are coming to my house tomorrow. Do you want to be there?" I'm like, okay. So I jumped in the car, drove up to Libby, and the guys there, I know a little bit of Spanish, and they're reading. They had workers from Mexico coming with the cleaning company, and they said, can I get you coffee and stuff? And so pretty soon they suited me up and said, okay, you can go in the building, but you just take 2 pictures and then you go out. And so that's basically what I did. This is an aerial of Death Mountain, which was W.R. Grace. This was the mountain where they mined all the vermiculite. It's kind of like an apple. They just kind of wound it, peeling it. And I'll never forget, I called a local pilot in Libby and said, I need you to take me up over, do some aerials, some sunset pictures. He goes, where do you want to go? I said, well, over the mine. And it just clicked. He just hung right up on me. I had to hire pilot out of Missoula here to fly to Libby, pick me up, and do the pictures. So that's how some people were in the me being there, some people weren't. A lot of work I did was at the hospital. The people were great. Basically, I would just go in and just say, you know, I'm a photographer, spokesman review. I would like to hang out in the waiting room. I don't want, you know, if I feel like I can approach somebody, I will, and just see if they wouldn't mind me photographing their lung capacity test. And this was the first guy who said yes, and so I got that picture rather quickly. One thing I've always struggled with in photo essays is a point picture, and this is pretty much a point picture of what Libby looks like right now as, you know, an environmental kind of place. The wood mill's still working, you know, the Cabinet Mountains in the background. And these are loggers that are assembling for a log drive that happened a few years ago. So, and that was this picture came out of a daily assignment for the paper. So I'm shooting for the daily paper, and I'm also shooting for the project. So, I'm sorry? Oh, thank you. Thanks. It's really interesting with this camera because a lot of the pictures were out of focus. Because I got this new camera. This is all shot with the digital camera, D1 camera, which is really bad. It does not hold midtones, and so I realized that. So I just made sure I had very strong whites, and I underexposed the whites by like 2 stops, and that way all the black would just go black, and I wouldn't have to worry about midtones. That's why there's really no midtones in any of these photographs. This is where the kids used to play. They used to have these popping sites. They used to store all the vermiculite inside of them, and the kids would go in there and slide down the piles of vermiculite, play in it, you know, while there was softball being played or baseball being played across the street. And pictures like this, I think I sat in there for probably 3.5, 4 hours at that door because there were pigeons up there and they were flying around. I knew that if I waited long enough, it would. So my boss, I have a cool boss. He's like, you know, nice shot today. I'm like, well, it only took 4 hours. And he goes, okay, that sounds okay. So let, you know, boss know that you're sitting in a shed, you know, for 4 hours. This is Mike Power's place, and this is basically where this stuff was invented. The guy who basically founded the mine, they had a laboratory. It was like basically in this guy's house, and so this was like ground zero for everything that was manufactured with the vermiculite. So he had this stuff all over his house, and so I'm like, well, let's just go down there and photograph it. And I got out of his basement, and I was like, I looked like a Christmas tree, you know, just covered with gold. My mother's Christmas tree. You have to understand what her Christmas trees look like. And I ran to the local place in town. It was a sporting goods store, and I went in there and I bought new clothes, and I got my clothes and I put them in a plastic bag and threw them away. And I think I was kind of reacting, but because there was such a short contact with the stuff. So it's not like asbestos is floating around Libby right now. It's just there's certain pockets of it that, you know, cannot be disturbed. Sally Fuchs is finding out here. This is at the, I believe this is at the card center. And basically, you know, I met her and said, can I photograph you going through your consultation with the doctor? She's like, yeah, but I didn't realize that what the extent of her visit was. And the doctor's basically telling her, it's possible in 35 years, these asbestos fibers are going to work from here out the outer casings of your lungs, but we won't know for about 20 to 25 years. And there I am sitting on the floor, you know, I'm like, can I buy you a cup of coffee or something? And we went out and had coffee, and then I met her kids after school. She invited me to dinner, and that's kind of how I do things as a journalist. I don't like to, I like to be nice to people. You know, I don't like to take pictures of people when they don't know I'm taking pictures. Libby got transformed from this little tiny little quiet community into this high-tech thing where they had like, this is an electron microscope, and this was actual a spike of asbestos fiber. You can see it have these little hooks on it. So every time you breathe, it goes in a little bit more, and it's like an arrow. It can't be pulled out. It can only go in further and further. So that's what basically goes through the walls of the lungs. This was another picture. I'll tell you another thing about the camera. we had a problem with the computer chip in the camera. It was back focusing by like 3-4 feet. And so I'm taking pictures of these ladies at this meeting where they're finding out that basically a third of the population might be affected with asbestosis. And I'm focusing here, but when I look at the picture on the computer screen, everything's focused 4 feet back, but it worked out well because it layered the faces. So some things happened by mistake, and I was focused on the picture of the guys there, not the kid on the road bit. But so I got the camera fixed and then realized I didn't have to, because there's some of the pictures where I was actually photographing someone 4 feet away, so I'd focus them and get them sharp, and I'd step back 1 more foot because I knew if the picture was out of focus, it would be in focus. I don't know. John Sale, my director of photography, well, former director of photography, was very instrumental in helping me do this story. He saw the photographs that I was taking, and I had like 4 of them. It might have been that picture, the stuff of the gold stuff hanging down, the sunrise. And he's like, yeah, these are pictorials, but you need to think of this as a movie. As like, you know, here's a hidden monster in this town. And it just really, I mean, I got goosepimples right now just thinking him saying that. And he goes, you need to set this up like a movie. You need to set this up like what is behind, what is in Libby, and you need to make it like that. So once I had a start of it, I just followed that dark edge with it, plus the bad exposure with the camera that I had to underexpose 2 stops. So everything has a dark edge at that point. But this is when they're putting up the, because when I do an experiment in someone's house to measure levels of fibers, they can't have any outside interference, and so they were just putting up plastic in the windows. Lara Parker, she ran a nursery, and that was her dream to live by the Kootenai River and have a nursery and sell flowers. And she had a mushroom farm underneath, and so the mine would bring all these tailings down, and she had like tons and tons of piles of this stuff, and she was potting plants with it. People would come by, can I buy some azaleas? Oh, sure, you know. You know, so the stuff just swarmed everywhere. It's like, it just has its fingers. It just keeps getting further and further out there, and I think in time we'll find out that there's a lot more people affected with this disease than we know of, especially when they start ripping down older homes that were built 35, 40 years ago.
You can feel it in your lungs when you drive into town. You can. When they were doing that cleanup, you can feel it. A lot of people.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Huh.
Absolutely. In your throat when you get into town.
Right. It's Mike Powers again. You know, the guys in the white suits comes and he gets his camera out and takes pictures. Again, just another scene setter of town, just kind of showing. I really love Libby, and it was hard for me to, because I go to Lake Koocanusa every year, and we stop in Libby, we buy our groceries, and I get all my fishing stuff there, and we go up for a few days, and it was hard for me to do some of these pictures because I love the area so much. I mean, I truly love the people in the area, and it was hard, but in doing the story, we had to be, you know, I had to be honest with some aspects of it. And one of the aspects is that it's pretty much, it's taken a hard hit. It's lost a lot of its trade, a lot of its wealth. This is how a lot of the kids who are now 35, 40 years old got asbestosis by the ball fields. And this is a cleaned up ball field. Actually, this is a ball field that's been moved to another side of town. And so I just wanted to show that relationship to a day gone past. But, you know, when I was taking this picture, I could just feel the eyes on me, you know, and it was very, very difficult to be there because I could hear Dad saying, oh, there's another son of a bitch, you know, this and that. But a lot of people, it took me 8 months to do this story, so they got pretty used to me being there. And plus I would camp out on the Kootenai River in summertime, so that was kind of cool to them, I guess, in that aspect. People doing asbestos tests, they would just kind of, you know, hang up their worker gear wherever having a break. One aspect it might have fit, but we didn't really go into too much depth about it. But I feel that probably the housing market suffered a little bit with Libby, and it was kind of weird that the name Loveless Realty was on the sign. But there's so many places for sale in Libby. It's because people have this feeling that, you know, if you can't move there. I tend to beg I tend to think differently. I think that I I think it's going to be I think it's a safe place. I don't think you can drive through town and get it. I mean, I don't know. Okay, so people, they're skeptical about moving there. Number one, because there's no jobs, and number two is, am I buying a house that is affected with asbestos fibers? I wanted to show daily life again in the positive way. People have their families, they have their church, they have things that help get them through stuff like this. And this church was great. They invited me in. This is Les Scremstead, and I saw some of the wonderful photographs downstairs that a lot of families. This guy worked at the mine for I think 17 years, and he used to come in the back door every day, dusty from work, and his wife would shake out the clothing, and in the mudroom, and wash everything every single day. So I went to the doctors, and I thought that these were his X-rays on the wall, because I knew he was very sick, but they're his wife's X-rays, because she's dying from it. And he feels really bad, because all he wanted to do was just support his family, and I don't know much about him anymore. I haven't seen him in years, but it was really tough to see such a really cool guy, blaming himself for hurting his family, and all he was trying to do was make a living for him. So it was really tough. Again, I don't think they ever had a machine like this, a CAT scan in Libby before this whole thing broke. So it's really changed the town. Mary Cassidy's funeral. She used to fish underneath the. It was like a bridge that went across the river to take stuff to the railroad tracks, and it was like a conveyor belt. And she mentioned how beautiful it was when the light would come through the dust when she was fishing every day as they moved the asbestos fibers. The summer I was there, I believe there was probably 5 confirmed cases of death due to asbestos exposure. There were many more deaths of people who were in the area, can't afford an autopsy, or, you know what I mean? So, but just her telling me about that, and the way she was breathing and just everything about it, it was just, it was like another day. This was in Troy at a church there, and it was just like, these people have been at 2 other funerals in that summer, and it's like, here's Mary,
You were saying before that you think when it comes out of all the homes, then we'll really find out more about how many people have this diseases to an extent, but nobody does autopsies anymore.
Right.
The autopsy rate is just a fraction of what it used to be.
Exactly. So we'll never know. I think the documented cases, I would say, or I would say times that by 6, especially in the Libby area. I think it's much higher than what's documented. This is Chloe, and her grandfather is, let me make sure I get this right. They're putting up a Memorial Day, which was very controversial in town. They wanted to put this on the main drag in town, and the business people were like, no way. You're not going to do that. So they got a space in the back of the cemetery. And so this little girl, this is her grandmother, this is her grandfather. Her grandmother, his wife, twice removed once, no, I'm just joking. His wife died of, which is her mother, died of asbestos exposure. It's showing up in the women and the older kids that are in their 50s and 60s. They're showing signs of this. And so, I'm taking a picture of little Chloe here, and Panasam's like, well, I looked at Galen, and I said, well, another generation is, it's going to be clean here. And so I got a call from her about a week later, and she goes, remember what you told me a week ago? She goes, we just found out at Chloe's little school that was just outside of town, the sandbox there registered one of the highest readings. And it was like, so it's like this little girl's not going to know for so long. And these are the documented cases of what they have on paper, saying that this many people in Libby died of asbestos exposures. But I think you could add 4 to every one person, easily. But But the project took about, I'd say, 50 shooting days. 50 shooting days. And when it came out, a lot of people don't like me there, I guess, anymore in Libby. But myself as a photojournalist, it's all about, you know, the human condition. It's about putting yourself out there and saying something you believe in and working as hard as you possibly can to do it. And I firmly believe that photojournalism can change the world, if not just a little piece that you live in. I just believe the power of photography can do it, and I'll do anything I can to keep doing stories like this. So that's it with that. Thanks.
I guess being exposed to this project, but also after seeing your work, Teresa, is I'm reminded a little bit of the mayor in Jaws, who's running around saying the water is safe, and let's not let anybody know that there's this big ominous thing out there, and we need to crush the truth. And so it's kind of this sociological thing, or a social stratus thing of, it's one thing for a photographer to go in and say, I'm going to document truth and reveal truth, but it's not truth to everyone.
Sure.
So I'm wondering about, and your comment about people in Libby's feelings about your work, or people feeling about digging up this part of history which is so painful. And can't we just forget about that and move on? Can you make some comments about that conflict between pursuing truth and revealing light and the social aspect of you guys are revealing something that's not truthful or is so painful or something in each of your projects?
Okay.
Confronting the mayor, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because the photo stories that I do are very very personal and very from my point of view. And I guess I'm lucky enough to work with publications that feel that, well, maybe I'm right about something some of the time. It's just some of the time, believe me. But it's a question that's always bugged me. Am I getting? I've done stories where I've been duped by people. And they're saying that the story was this, and it got published, and then I'd meet the guy down the street, and I'd meet another guy down the street, another guy down the street saying, no. He did that same thing 5 years, you know what I mean? But it's not for me to try to figure that out. It's just up to me as being a witness and a point in someone's life and photographing it. And when it goes into paper, I guess it's just, people have the choice whether to pick up the paper or not to pick up the paper. So they have a choice right there whether they want to look at the view of the spokesman review or they don't. So it's just kind of just our point of view. But one real quick story that I was mentioning earlier, that I was in a waiting room in Libby, and it's a very small little waiting room in the hospital. It's probably bigger now, but it's like the one there at that time was really small. And this lady goes, "What are you here for?" Because I had my camera. She goes, "I'm here documenting these. There is no asbestos problem here. What? You're terrible." And then the lady goes, "Well, excuse me," sitting right on the other side of me, going, "Excuse me, my husband's dying in this." And they're going back and forth, saying, "No, it's not." This woman saying, "No, you're trying to get money out of the company." And the ladies go, "No, the company killed us." So it's like, I just put it out there for people to digest themselves, I guess.
I think photojournalists are historians. At least that's how I see my role as a photojournalist. And I think with this Minidoka project or any long-term project that I've taken on, there is certainly a selection and an editing process. I choose specific subjects maybe because of the visual aspect or access or different issues that come up. But in this case, I think it's really important to remember the people who actually experienced the camp are dying out. At this reunion, you can see how old a lot of the people were already. You know, the ones that were babies are alive, but they don't really have any memories of it. And so it's, I think, important to document what's there, and that's why I call it remnants, because I really think of it as collecting these pieces, and I'm trying to create this quilt, you know, kind of a patchwork quilt to put together a picture for myself so that I have some understanding of what happened, and just, you know, hopefully in my discovery, other people will discover it as well. So I hope that addresses your question.
I was looking at your photographs. They're so beautiful, and I was thinking, oh, she's really choosing this, you know, this awful period of time and really aestheticizing it and making it really beautiful. But I'm thinking the objects that you chose to photograph, the woodwork, the tables, the furniture, the remnants of rock gardens, that's a testament to the human spirit.
Absolutely.
There. Yeah,
And that's something that I discovered too, is just the optimism. And actually, while it was a terrible experience, it also brought families together, and they had, I guess, leisure time to pursue these creative avenues that they didn't have time to before because they were working and, you know, tending to the kids. And so it was an opportunity for them to do things that they would not have normally had a chance to do. And I think that, you know, certainly there's an Asian aesthetic in terms of their surroundings. If you go to Japan, you know, you're kind of immersed in it because everything is just designed and set in a certain way, and it's a really strong influence. And I think that that first generation had it a lot more than, you know, as each generation goes down, it gets more diluted, but certainly it's very strong in that first generation.
I've noticed that when people are confronted with powerful photographs that you've chosen, perhaps on the basis of editing or framing or whatever, that they often become, they snicker or they laugh, you know? And I wanted to get a picture to use, a very graphic photograph, and I had to call a doctor to see if I could get a release on it. And she said, well, why do you want it? And I said, well, I want people to know what can happen if such and such takes place. And she said, well, are you wanting to get this so that the general population will get a reaction out of the photograph? So she was kind of testing me, you know, where was I coming from in my, you know, was I a muckraker or, you know, genuine? But so I started thinking about that emotion that accompanies my own looking at photos. And I realized that some of these photos would bring up an emotion that was almost, it was almost as though there was humor involved in looking at it, okay? And I had to explore that for a long time before I was able to really discover where that was coming from. And I found in my own self that the photos were so upsetting that it was the only, I guess my body and my mind, it was my way of dealing with it, that almost started to laugh, okay? Anyway, I hope that adds something to this, but I think that these photos are very, very necessary.
Thank you. Susan Sontag talks about this compulsion we have to look at things that are awful, and it's really face who we are as humans when we stop and, you know, rubberneck when we see an accident, and want to look at the grotesque. You know, there is a desire to do that, and even to see suffering, and there might be something that's inherent in our, you know, lower instincts, I think, be drawn to that.
That's a good point, and that's why I'm probably shouldn't let I'm wired. My boss here is this the new editor. I drive past car wrecks. I just go, what was that over there? I didn't see anything. I don't like to take pictures of people that are in pain. I don't like to take pictures of people unless I've introduced myself to them. I don't like taking pictures through a telephoto lens, through a car and there's someone trapped in there, they're screaming for help. I'm not going to do it. Absolutely not. I just feel it's a huge invasion of privacy. I feel it's a cheap shot. And that's why when I put my work out there that, I know in my heart that it was okay to do those pictures. And so I think that's where I come from with that.
Mavanese has, I was asking him, how do these people let you become part of such intimate moments, this man's death and his body wrapped in mourning. His wife, that victim's wife, wanted Mavanese there to document. She wanted people to see this is what can happen.
Yeah.
So he had an agreement with all these people that he's photographed.
Yeah, I don't think the general public, I've done other photo stories, and one was on a woman with eating disorders, and it was very intimate. I was 6 months with her, and I photographed every aspect of bulimia. And I'll never forget, this is in Biddeford, Maine, a real small town, and most people knew me from living right downtown. They're like, so where'd you hide the cameras to do that story on that lady? And they were serious. I'm like, are you kidding me? They thought I was like hiding around the corner taking these pictures. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I was just totally thrown by that. But people perceive the press as that way. And that's why I love working for a newspaper. I hate working for a newspaper. I love it because it's a good medium to get work out and to reflect what your community's about. But at the same time, we seem to be lumped in this, you're one of those guys. We're one of those photographers. And I do the best I can to educate people, but it's a tough thing to shoot pictures of people in intimate situations because people don't understand that you spent 2 weeks with them before you even took a photograph.
And there is a history of, I don't know if we do as a photojournalist.
Yeah.
I mean,
He would run around
Yeah, he
a
was.
lot of crime scenes.
Yeah.
He was looking for, bloody murder.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Brian, you talked a lot about developing a relationship with people and living.
Mm-hmm.
In the time period that you were shooting your pictures for the essay upstairs, did you notice a difference in people's attitudes towards you from the beginning to the end? Did that change, or did the players change? I mean, how did your relationship evolve with the town?
I was a visitor. I was welcomed by a lot. I was tolerated by a lot. And I guess that, in the way that I feel, I develop a very good relationship with people, but I am a newspaper photographer. I mean, the relationship goes to the point where once the story is published, I'm probably not going to see you again, unless, you live in the area. There's lots of people I've done stories on and I keep in contact with. But, at some point, I have to forget about that, not to a point where I'm being, not caring about people, because I totally do, but it's part of the business. I have a deadline, I have a story to do. And so once I realized that half the town hated me and half the town didn't, I just try to make it almost like being businesslike about it. If somebody would say something to me, oh, there's that photographer, I go, how you doing? I can't confront them about it. I'm like, hi, how you doing? I promise you won't see me tomorrow. I was just, but I'll see you next Tuesday. And guys would just, flip me off or whatever. So I had to handle it that way.
Don't you think some of the fear, though, is because in this age, you can digitally edit photos and you can really tell whatever story you want to at this point. And I think that people are aware of that, or hearing a lot about that. And they know that, this face can be put on that body and all of a sudden they're a supermodel. And so I think, don't you think that that's generated some of that fear and non-acceptance of some of the photojournalists, their concern about editing or what story is really going to be told?
I think there's so much more caution about privacy, and Big Brother is watching. I think maybe is a part for that, but I can never remember someone saying, no, I don't want my picture to be taken, where I have students that are having that problem here in Missoula even, which is so surprising to me. But I think it just comes down to people wanting to be more private and not wanting to have their image out in the public because of what might happen to it, of being manipulated possibly.
Isn't there a difference between the footage you gathered and footage you gathered in terms of one's income? You know, you're exposing things that directly impact the ability of people to make a living. I mean, Libby was shut down probably by the time you got there, whereas you're exposing something that really wasn't income-based. Is that? So
That's a good distinction.
Yeah, there are two different things. And I think that, having spent some time with Libby myself, I think that there's a really deeper problem in white Western civilization. Maybe it's found in all civilizations, but I see a particular huge problem in white Western civilization in that many of the things that we have done, Stevie Wonder summed it up. You believe in things you don't understand and you suffer. Whereas primitive cultures over the course of 50,000 years have developed ways of living that eliminate from that spectrum of life those things that can be harmful. But the point here, I think, is that there's a lot of denial that goes on that's attached to some of the systems that we utilize and some of the things that we have done. And I think many of us that utilize the parts of this technological society, whether you drive cars or use sheetrock or whatever, there's a tendency to try to protect that hidden badness. You know, we all know that brake dust is bad. You know, we all know, I think now, or many of us are knowing that fiberglass insulation is bad, and that's another question. But I think that when you get into things like this, a lot of denial comes up. It's not just the personal, you know, that you're delving into somebody's life, or that this footage might appear somewhere and some harm could come to someone's family. You're delving into a system that has a lot of problems. And oftentimes an uneducated population that has got a lot of fear to start with, anyway.
Along those lines, maybe a little more specifically, have either one of you noticed differences between how what turn out to be victims react to a photojournalist and how a perpetrator will react? There's obviously a lot of gray area. People in Libby, worked at the mine and maybe kept silent, but at the same time they were victims. In the internment camps, there were, I'm sure, lots of Americans who, even though they were responsible for the internment, they tried to help out when people were interned. Have you noticed any differences along those lines?
I have to say I haven't personally. What's interesting to me is just the hostility that is still in existence today. In the Times News, which is the paper closest to the site, there's still letters to the editor about, not wanting to have it recognized as a national monument, and just a lot of anti-negative letters. It's, again, interesting to me how these feelings are still running very deep and strong, even though it's more than 60 years after the fact.
How old are the people who are writing these letters?
I don't know, but I'm guessing that they're probably, 60, 70 years old, in that range, that were maybe teens to 20s during World War II is my guess. But, it just has their name, and I haven't, met any of them to know, but, yeah.
Did the younger people, when you were on site, give you the negative feeling?
No. The site, when I first started going there, because it was just newly named, there really was no activity there whatsoever. I think now, as more and more people are hearing of it, it will become more popular. In fact, the National Park Service has gone through about a year's worth of public meetings, going to the various sites in Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, and Idaho to find out what the public wants at the site. And what they're going to do is try and acquire more land and to try and rebuild some of the original structures so that people have a sense of what's there. Because when I first went, I was looking out at this farmland thinking, okay, now what was over there? But it's actually, the camp was behind me, and it's really difficult to get oriented there because nothing, as I said, the roads and everything are all different. So if you're looking at a map, you can't really figure out where you are because it's just, there's no landmarks except for the canal, which it's just hard to get an idea of the direction and things. So they're trying to, build it piece by piece, but it really boils down to money, and there's just no budget set aside for it, to really get going. So it'll probably be 10 to 12 years before anything is actually done there. But again, more and more people are going. In fact, there's a pilgrimage scheduled for the end of June where a couple busloads from Seattle will be traveling back, and people will be remembering the place at that time. So they'll have more and more of those types of activities.
Is there any visitor center or something like that?
No, not at this time. And in fact, some of the neighbors there, speaking of people who may not want it, are against having anything built because of the impact it will have to their area. Because it's very rural and very quiet and peaceful when you go out there. And so, they're envisioning these big busloads of tourists coming in and, trashing the area and, pretty much disrupting what lives they are used to. And so they're not very excited about it. And in fact, Carl Eberly, the person whose home I photographed, has since moved, and he's renting his place. And I tried to get in touch with him, but I just know he went to North Dakota, and so I'm trying to find out if it was because of this, that he left, which I think it probably was. So.
Brian, you spoken earlier, you said that there's definitely conflicting opinions in Libby, and both in response to you as far as people's response to what's going on there. But that sense of conflict and community tension in some ways isn't reflected in the photos that you have. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit. I mean, if you see that primarily as a conscious choice on your part, or if that's a limitation of the visual medium, and are there other things that you felt were important to try and depict, but you felt it was difficult to depict through?
Well, really the one conflict that I just wanted to photograph was the community's conflict with the disease, first and foremost. But like I said, when I was in that waiting room, I think it's like an unspoken, you know what I mean? The business people all stay with the business people. The people that live on the dirt roads hang out with the people on the dirt roads. You know what I mean? It's a very separate. And then, I happened to spark that one instance between these two ladies. They were ready to kill each other, and I'm like, would have been a great shot, but like I said, I'm the one that instigated it. So, so that was a problem. But I guess my work is political. But the thing I like to stay away from, you hear that in a community. And I think that, in some part, and that was brought out in the written part of the story. And at some point, you just have to show what's there instead of trying to read into something. They had, it's not like people, they would have a parade down the street and people would yell and scream one side to the other. But I'm sure they thought it. I'm sure they thought it. And actually, I haven't been to Libby's. That story was published in, when was it published? 91, 92, something like that. And I'm sure if I would keep going back and like there's a house cleaning going on and someone driving by, kind of like scowling at, oh, look at them wasting their money getting this done or whatever, might work out. But I never try to. Anytime I go out to photograph something, I know that there's certain things I want to go, but I don't like to pigeonhole myself into a political aspect of this is how the story's played out within these people. To me, the story is just the people dealing with this problem. I think there's different racial issues that I've worked on, like North Idaho when it used to be pretty outrageous with its Nazis and stuff running around. That was pretty evident, but this was different. This was just like a silent war there.
Mike Cohan, did you ever meet Mike Cohan up in Libby?
I might have.
Mike started MVIA, the Missoula Valley Recruitment Association. He was big on air quality. He helped us get MTBE out of here and some bad things. So he was all for environmental controls. But when he got up to Libby and started the business, then he did not want to hear anything about the asbestos. exposed the asbestos problem, he was pretty much in your face, you know, so the money,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
I work with my cousin's wife, Pat, and she's the nurse at the car club in London. Possibly attitudes change over time. I'm not really quite sure where you get your information, but what I was going to say is that it's not only is your work artistic, it's kind of more of a comment than a question.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is it artistic, I think it has such a historical importance as as trees.
Yeah, it's really important documenting our time. I mean, my wife's a photojournalist also, and you know, there's been days where, I don't know, I get done with the story and I go through this like almost mourning period. I don't know what it is. You ever go through that? You finish a picture story and you're just like wiped, exhausted, and I can never do that again. You know, my wife just basically says, we're not going to quit. We'll quit doing this if we don't think it means something to somebody someday. And I just can't let that go. I guess maybe it's a little too much bravado, but I just really feel that documentary photojournalism can, I just work in a small community, can have change. And so,
Something kind of along those lines, but is just the willingness for subjects to be photographed. And I think that 911 and that whole racial kind of profiling brought that to the forefront. Plus, they were also making connections to Pearl Harbor's attack and making reference to that. But people, because of the national monument status, I think are much more comfortable about talking about it, sharing their experiences. And so I think, if I had tried to do this 20 years ago, I don't know that people would have been so willing to have me take their picture, even if it's just a portrait. But I think now they're much more open to it.
I think you'll find that in Libya maybe 25 years down the road once I've heard some things when I was up there, they wanted to do a wall of some sort, not copying the Vietnam Wall, of course, but something that remember people's names. And when they start doing that, and people will come together and heal together, but it's not going to be for a long time. It's like it takes years and years. So I think Libya will pull through with flying colors. I really do.
How long will that stuff be around?
I don't know. It depends. Stuff's fine. From what I understand, the stuff is okay if left untouched. If it's out in the air blowing around, you got a problem. But if you live in a house and you go up in the attic, you don't want to touch the stuff. You just don't want to. You don't want to be around it at all. But it's not like it was before when it was being ushered out of town millions of times a day on open-ended railroad cars. Going down like a car down a dirt road.
In Skagway, Alaska, if you go up there to see the national park slides, which were hand-colored by someone very well done, and you go into the food stores when the cruise ships come in, you notice that all the bottled water disappears when the cruise ships come in, the drinking water. And so I said, well, how come? They said, well, there's lead in the water. So I went to the health department, and I stood in this little building, and I leaned on the counter, and there was a stack of lab reports that had the letters P as in Peter and B as in boy, which is the periodic table symbol for lead. It was about a stack that high. Let me do it. If you're still here, she'll validate this. So when it came my turn, I said, I understand you have a lead problem here. You're talking about this stuff being trucked through town, right? And they said, no, there's no lead problem here. And I said, well, what are these EPA documents here? And they, oh. Well, then some of the townspeople got mad. And they said, well, what kind of wackos are they letting into Skagway now, okay? Well, that lead was trucked in on open railroad cars, and it got all into the town. So my question is, if that stuff was being spewed around and the houses are full of it.
Oh, yeah.
It's there for a long time.
Sure. Yeah, I haven't been back there, but I understand they are cleaning up some homes. Isn't that right?
I don't know.
Oh, yeah. And I don't know what that looks like. Like I said, once I finished the story, I just felt like I was out of breath, believe me. It's doing a picture story like that takes a hell of a lot out of me. I'm one white dude after a story like this. I just finished one up on the Veterans Hospital in Spokane, and There's definitely a decompression period because it takes a lot out. If you can go into a situation like that and photograph people, dying in the grave, and then go have a beer afterward and laugh. I mean, so maybe some people deal with it that way, but it takes a lot out of me. I don't eat right. I don't sleep right. I get cold sores. I chain smoke cigarettes like a maniac. I'm getting hypnotized tomorrow, by the way, so for the third time. So.
Sit down and talk with you, any of the cleanup crew at all, were you able to talk with them?
Yeah, a little bit, but they have their, the government people they had their job to do, and they had their protocol on how to deal with the press. I did have a couple good connections that would let me know where something was happening, what day something was happening. That's about the extent of that, but that was still pretty good information.
Did they talk with you about fiberglass insulation at all? I mean, did anybody bring that up?
No, I never got into that because it's just like I was so overwhelmed by just the story at hand that, maybe some other day.
Wanted to just ask both of you, and then maybe we can take a break after this and get some cookies and tea or whatever. But what's the next project that each of you are working on?
That's a good question. I have a number of ideas, but this is kind of a long-term one. I'd still like to go up to Alaska, where some of the internees were taken, and I haven't been able to do that yet. I haven't done any work in Oregon yet. So I still have a couple states to hit before I feel like I've wrapped this up. So I'll still be working on this.
I just finished up the Veterans Hospital in Spokane, which took about 4 months to do, and I got some smaller projects. Everything I do is not a big, giant project like Libby. Quite the contrary, actually. But child obesity is one thing I'm starting to work on right now.
What is it?
Child obesity. Just the whole attitude of advertising with, and I just realized when I have a 5-year-old, and I watch these cartoons with them in the morning, and these commercials come on with this high-fat, incredibly bad stuff, and so I'm starting to get into the psyche of doing this story. So I'm going to be eating a lot of Cocoa Puffs. But yeah, child obesity, drama in a prison visitation room. Here's this little room, 3 by 3 with the glass, 3 by 3. Showing it empty and then shooting details of people visiting each other, like all the stuff that happens in this 3 by 3 foot cubicle. So I'm doing that also right now. But
There's another story like this in, not as bad as Libby, but it's in Anaconda. EPA's in there right now cleaning up the arsenic, and you want to go and talk to folks over there if you...
It's interesting.
Somebody needs to cover that.
Yeah. Unfortunately for me, the Spokesman Review has really pulled back our resources. We used to circulate a daily newspaper in Libby, which is 160-something miles away. So it's just harder for us to get out there. That's why Spokane is it's got 1 million picture stories left, so I'm not worried about a lack of stories. Thank you. Thank you.